I first met Fred Lamond after one of his talks in London in 2001. I had already heard of him. He had gained a reputation among Gardnerians for talking too openly about the activities within Gerald Gardner's Coven, which he had been an original member of. He made me review my attitudes towards the early Gardnerian Wiccans, which, like many, I had perceived as being dogmatic. But he was clearly anything but. Although many of Gardner's original female members survived into the new millennia, none of his male members did. This gave Fred a unique viewpoint on the early days of Wicca, as he was, after all, the last of Gardner's high priests.
The first thing I want to ask you, Fred, is actually how you came into the craft, because you're actually one of the elders.
Yes.
And then
if we believe Patricia Crowther's revised, biography, then I am the longest serving.
Yeah. Really, so also your memories of Gerald, because you're one of the last surviving people.
How I got into it is quite simply this. I fortunately was never indoctrinated in Christianity. My grandmother, who was a sort of deist, so to say, her great guru was Goethe, you see, and she always gave me Goethe's dictum, honor silently the unknowable, and all religious dogmas are lies. And I was sent at 13 to a Calvinist catechism for cultural reasons. She said, it's part of the education, the culture of an educated European to know who all the Old Testament prophets and the New Testament people were, So go and listen to what they tell you. Remember it. It's part of your culture. As to whether you want to believe it, make up your own mind, you see. And I never could believe it. But I was basically in my late teens and early 20s, I was primarily interested in politics. I was very active in the European Federalist movement. And then at the age of 23, I had a mystical experience in the arms of my first fiancée. And that changed from that point on, my main interest was religion rather than politics. I tried to understand that experience and read everything I could about sexual psychology on the one hand and comparative religion. And they intersected at the description of the love goddesses of antiquity like Aphrodite and Ishtar. So I thought, so it's Aphrodite whom I met. Well, it's happened to me, it must have happened to other people. So I started looking for fellow worshippers of the goddess. Then I came across an anthropologist, his name escapes me at the moment, it's in my book, Gardner Taylor's book, Sex in History. And he was putting forward the Margaret Murray thesis that the witches were a survival of an old goddess-worshipping religion. Well, this has been exploded since then by historians, but at the time it seemed plausible. So I started looking for books on witchcraft, and then came across Gerald Gardner's book, Witchcraft Today, which rang all my bells. So I wrote to him, met him in June 56. Then in September he introduced me to the members of his coven, and I met them about 3 or 4 times before they had meetings, and then left, when the meeting began. And then in January 57, I was told by Jack Bray saying, look, if it's all right with you, we'll initiate you at February Eve. And that's how I got into Wicca.
And what are your specific memories of Gerald as a personality?
Oh, he's an extremely lovable man. I mean, he was gentle, very humorous. He was a very excellent raconteur, told stories and so forth, and completely unpretentious. And, you couldn't help but love him. At the same time, he was a trickster. He had a very creative attitude to factual truth. See. He imagined what it must have been like, what the witches were like in the Middle Ages. And then said, well, I know about that because it has been a continuous chain of initiations since the Middle Ages, which of course was utterly unprovable. And he did like to embroider the truth. Now, the high priestess who replaced Doreen Valiente, Dionis, had a sort of elfin face. She could have come straight out of an Arthur Rackham drawing. And Gerald was telling me that she came from a hereditary witch family, whereas in fact she came from a Jewish family in Cardiff, you see, or something like that, and had just been initiated 2 years before me. So after about 8 weeks, after my initiation, after I was told a few more of Gerald's porkies, I sort of had to crisis said, did the old fraud invent the whole thing? I mean, is it something he's just thought up? Well, and I had a tough 3 days until an inner voice told me, it doesn't matter. It works for you. You know, at your initiation, you encountered again the same power you encountered in the arms of your first girlfriend. And the spells, by that time, we'd worked together in some healing spells. The spells seemed to achieve their objects. Does it matter whether the rituals which achieve these effects are 3,000 or 3,000 years old? Now, in the process, I think what would have been 10 years of spiritual development was encapsulated into 8 weeks. Because if I had, instead of meeting Gerald, met a much more credible teacher like Idris Shah, for instance, I probably would have sat at his feet for 5 or 10 years, or until he kicked me out and said, Fred, you're on your own now, think for yourself. But as it is, in 8 weeks, I had to think for myself. You know, does it matter whether this is genuine stuff coming from the Middle Ages or was invented a couple of years ago? And come to the conclusion, it doesn't matter, it works.
I've got to ask you this one. What's the biggest change you've seen in the last 50 years in the actual, within Wicca, within the witchcraft movement?
The witchcraft movement under Gerald Gardner was tremendously countercultural. It's become much more superficial. Now, in the original system, there are 3 techniques which challenge people's boundaries. In order to have a mystical experience of transcending and getting cosmic consciousness, you've got to transcend the boundaries of your ego, the defensive boundaries of the ego. And the 3 techniques, or there are many techniques, but the 3 main ones are ritual nudity, binding and scourging, and the Great Rite. Well, most covens still do the ritual nudity bit, which of course is much less countercultural today, because, people are wearing less and less in Germany. On most beaches it's okay to be complete nude. In Mediterranean beaches are topless and that sort of thing. So it's much less, ritual nudity is much less countercultural than it was in the 50s. But the other 2 are mostly done symbolically, which is absolutely useless as far as I'm concerned.
What direction do you feel Wicca is moving in now? And particularly it was interesting to read your book. You actually had criticisms, which is unusual.
Yes.
It's also very brave, I think. I'm actually pleased to see it.
Yes.
What direction do you think Wicca should be looking at taking now? Or should it be actually staying in the counterculture, or should it be opening up and embracing modern culture?
Well, of course, countercultural, there isn't any... counterculturalism is negative, One doesn't want to go set out intentionally to shock the Pope, or to shock Mrs. Whitehouse. One should affirm one's own values fearlessly. And where these values coincide with Christian values, that's okay. If they don't coincide, it's too bad, But basically, we should neither seek the approval nor to shock Christianity or any other religion. And yes, we should basically affirm our own values. And if we are really serious that we are nature-revering religion, and we want to get away from this attitude, the monotheistic attitude, of being basically solitary beings, individuals, whose whole sense of self is behind our eyes and head, and looking at the nature from outside into a feeling that we are part of nature, that we're in the pool, we are in the ocean, instead of looking at it from the outside. then we should act like that. We should develop in everyone the consciousness. If we believe that the gods are in us, as well as around us, then we should try and be as good a personification of the god or the goddess as we can be. You know, what is it to be a god? You know, what is it to be a goddess? And let's behave like that and feel like a personification of the god and the goddess. In other words, develop our own self-consciousness about that and act accordingly in our relationships, which means, of course, not just doing rituals for, healing the earth, but behaving healthily. I mean, not doing things which harm our own bodies, which harm our own state of health. That's basically what I say. And of course, it's not something where people should be left on their own to struggle with their whatever addictions they've got. We should, as a movement, and particularly within our covens, help each other to achieve divine consciousness and to look after ourselves.
Okay, this is the open bit. If there's anything else you want to add or put on or feel you want to talk about.
No, I mean, where I see Wicca going at the moment, thanks to Buffy, Charmed, and Sabrina, it's become very fashionable, particularly among teenagers, which I don't think is a bad thing. And while there is an awful lot of rubbish, being published, those teenagers who are genuine seekers and don't just want to follow a fashion are going to see through them and may be helped. And as I say, if they sincerely go to one of these phony schools of Wicca, but they're going there sincerely, they'll, whatever initiation they get will take, and the goddess will take over their training and either directly give them direct inspirations is what they should do, or lead them to a more reputable teacher.